mobile, that over there in Africa, in Angola, on this, well, the tour that Pope Leo XIV has had in Africa. For many years, since 2009, the Pope or any Pope hadn't gone to that country. Another image that is surprising is the amount of military movement heading toward the Middle East. Military movements taking place between Europe and the Middle East are surprising today. Let's go into the details of what's happening in the world. Thank you very much for joining us. We are live. This is a short live broadcast before the longer live session with Astrid. So let's go straight from this live broadcast to the full report. But there are several things I wanted to talk to you about before Astrid joins us here. First of all, there's a revelation that has honestly caused quite a stir. It's gotten a lot of attention, especially from sites specialized in military topics, because of what they've now revealed about intelligence matters. And the United States military reveals what Iran's real military situation is, and it's very different from what people used to think. Let's get into the details of what's happening. Let's also look at what's happening around the world, because there are a series of phenomena that we've been observing from the beginning, all heading toward the sea. The effect of this phenomenon could even become a record-breaking El Niño event, but it goes beyond that because the anomaly has already started and the El Niño phenomenon hasn't been confirmed yet. We'll be talking more about that later on, before we go live tonight. Let's get into the details of what's happening and get things rolling, because the chaos in the Middle East, especially in the Strait of Hormuz, is enormous. What's at stake there is how this year is going to end, whether it's with a crisis and a sort of financial pause, with all the effects that a basically global recession brings. Or if we're going to barely make it through, but let's say not with such an extensive crisis. First, let's go into the details of what's happening, because Iran is armed, and it's armed much more than previously thought. According to what the same U.S. intelligence sources reveal, U.S. intelligence and military officials have revealed a concerning assessment about Iran's military capability, which is the issue here. One thing is what politicians sell us, in this case Trump, and something very different is the information or reports that they actually give you about what they have. If intelligence has a report, if the military has a report based on evidence, then they're going to show it to you, they're going to publish it. Many times politicians don't like those kinds of reports. That's why there was talk that they were going to fire Tulsi Gabbard, the US intelligence chief, because she has contradicted Donald Trump several times, since he wants to see everything more optimistically, so to speak, but out of touch with reality. According to the estimates that have now been published, Iran still possesses at least 40% of its drone arsenal. These long-range Shahed-type drones, a notable figure given the bombings they've endured. It's unclear if they've stopped making more or are still sending them. There are details indicating that they're arriving via the Caspian Sea. Drones of the same design as the Shahed drone, but this time not Iranian-made but Russian-made. In other words, through the Caspian Sea, which is the easiest way for the Russians on this side to connect with the Iranians who are on this southern part of the sea. So through here, these planes would be arriving. Planes, I insist, let's say unmanned as they're called. Drones, kamikaze drones, which are almost like they're ultra cheap. And when they send swarms, they make it very difficult for the defenses of any ship, any refinery, any place or any country, including countries that have very advanced defense protection systems like Israel. Even in those countries, they sometimes have very severe effects. Look, the most alarming thing is not just that, but also that 60%, mind you, 60% of the ballistic and cruise missiles are being preserved. This indicates an offensive capability that is far from being neutralized, according to intelligence reports, let me stress. Now, one of the key points is the recovery of more than 100 launch systems that had previously been buried or flooded. It indicates an offensive that is far from being neutralized, according to intelligence reports, and well, piedras. Well, in the satellite images we showed a few days ago, you could already see how they have operated and how they have cleared things out. What used to take them months now took only days. super fast to be able to clear things out and deal with it? Well, recovering these hundreds of launch systems they have hidden there is also one of the key points of this satellite report that we presented to be able to clean. Well, they say they're not destroyed, but rather damaged, or some are buried, but they recover them quickly. The debris has been set aside. Iran's strategy is to have these arsenals buried under bunkers deep underground. And well, yes, okay, you cover them up for a while, but you quickly uncover them and have access to many missiles and missile launches. That information was reported by the American media outlet the New York Times. That's why it also means that this is already being spread in the most important media outlets in the United States. Obviously concerning. Analysts warn that this could weaken the strategic impact of the attacks, especially the claim that the missile launch infrastructure in that country has been destroyed. And at least this intelligence report says, well, yes, I mean, there is serious damage. I mean, if they take down 40 or 50% of the launchers, whatever it is, obviously that's tremendous. But if they still have 60% of their capacity, then obviously it means that their strength is much greater than it seems. Another thing that also stands out is that analysts say that in geopolitical terms, the message is clear. Iran's deterrent capability is still there. So what comes next is that they're going to control the Strait of Hormuz. Basically, we're going to look at that in depth in the next broadcast, which I insist continues right after this one ends. We're going to talk with Astrid for a little while about that topic, about how, well, the Strait of Hormuz is under the control of the Iranians, and they even boast about it. There are several matters I would also like to talk to you about. Like the military strategy sites focused mainly on the handling and types of weapons, how they are used, and so on. They are surprised at how, with limited capabilities on Iran's part, they have managed to take control of the Strait of Hormuz. And with this, part of the flow of energy resources around the world has been stopped. That they have made this move is a very negative development for Trump. Why? Because in the end, this is a kind of blackmail. Today he himself said they can't blackmail me. Well, obviously if he's saying that, it's for a reason. It's because he really feels that way. It feels like blackmail to him. Obviously, when the odds are against you, you're not going to play fair when a battle is imminent and we're heading into it. What the regime is risking is the very existence of the regime itself. They know that. That's the idea. In fact, to bring down a regime like that of the Ayatollahs. Come on, it's no secret. Obviously, Netanyahu has said it. Trump himself has said it. That's the idea. That was the background. So, when you're already telling the enemy that what you want is for them to disappear completely, that this is the mission basically, then that enemy becomes stronger. And it's like locking up a wounded lion and not giving it any way out. It's going to do everything possible to keep fighting. And that's what's happening right now. It does everything possible, even making enemies with all its neighbors. They'll do whatever it takes to stay there, just so they don't get moved out with a lot of losses. And those losses would be huge. It will take years for them to restore this infrastructure to its former condition. But the thing is that right now, the circumstances are such that both Israel and the United States have decided to engage in this war. For that to happen again, decades could go by, and in that time, that regime could be reformed and strengthened. So the next step, the fork we're going to face today, is either the conflict continues and we end up seeing who the real winner is, or this simply gets cancelled and the conflict will return later because the problems haven't been solved. It's that simple. Another important topic is also what's happening around the planet with this thermal anomaly. This is becoming increasingly concerning and I'd like to discuss it briefly. Let's get into the details. Right now, there is a temperature anomaly developing that is starting to become concerning, especially because records are being broken. We saw that since 2000, it's been 26 years since there has been a drought as severe as the one currently happening in the United States. But the calculations go further. They say that it's about to break a series of records in which this drought and this situation that is happening in some areas at least hasn't been seen since the late 1800s. People are having a tough time in the first quarter, especially January through March. Now, the El Nino phenomenon, we also talked about it a few days ago. How this thermal anomaly adds up along with this warning from scientists who are noticing how it's decreasing. There is this flow, these ocean currents, the famous current in the Atlantic. We discussed this recently and it's an issue that will take time. Let's hope it takes years or never happens. But what is going to happen this year, what is already happening is this series of phenomena of the famous ENSO, or the El Nino Southern Oscillation. According to reports, it's a complex interaction between the ocean and the atmosphere. They are being altered, the winds as well as the pressure and the temperature in the sea, and now maps are starting to appear showing how the phenomenon is happening in this region at the center of the planet, but it has climate effects on a global level. The cycle has three phases: the warm phase. What is the planetary cycle? I mean, one of the phases is called El Nino, which is the one we're starting to observe a little, like it's heading that way, but it's not fully there yet. Okay, La Nina, which is a phenomenon, let's say, opposite to the El Nino phenomenon, which is colder, and the neutral, which is a warm phase. But the situation is that the neutral phase, I mean, the one we're supposed to be seeing now is still a neutral phase. They say it's being experienced in a very disruptive, very different way. According to what they say, since the spring of 2026, it started to intensify as soon as it began. The climate's peak, with behavior more typical of autumn, what we would see in autumn. During this period, this is expected over the next weeks and months. It is expected that storms will start to form and that as the hurricane season begins, there will be an intense heat wave in which we may not have as many hurricanes, maybe even fewer than in other years. But we are going to have a lot of storms and a lot of rain, but above all, a lot of heat. This will happen in some regions, and in other areas, as we are already seeing right now, there will be a lot of heat with less rain. In other words, it says the following. Regions in the center, south, and southwest will face a more intense heat wave, more heat but less rain, which could cause or worsen drought conditions that are already being experienced. In contrast, the north toward the western part, even the center of the country. Yes, what will be experienced is different. They will experience, when winter comes, wetter winters with more persistent rains and lower than usual temperatures during the winter. The jet streams will play a key role, carrying moisture and causing heavy rains, frosts, and even snowfalls in unusual areas. For example, today in Monterey, right in the middle of April, we are going to have temperatures of 12 degrees in just a few moments. It's really unusual to see temperatures that are closer to winter, and in April we usually have temperatures that are more like summer. Scenarios that have already happened before could repeat themselves, like in 1997 or even in 2016, with periods of extreme cold and snow in regions where those kinds of phenomena don't usually occur. However, what we are seeing now in this shorter period, just counting April and what is expected for May, is that intense heat waves are already about to start. That's what is going to start happening from now on. According to the reports, starting from April, mid-April and May, there will be periods of intense heat, but the risk will increase, especially if the phenomenon is confirmed as an El Nino event, since they say it would be a phenomenon of. We will obviously be commenting on this here, not just on this topic, and we will go into more detail. I don't want to dwell on it any longer because obviously we have to wait for the evidence, right? As these phenomena occur, we will discuss them here, just as we have done with the forest fires in Florida or what is happening in some other regions with unusual flooding. And the weather is unusual almost every year now, right? I mean, it keeps surprising us in different regions. This time, let's move on as well. To another topic before we go live with Astrid. A former CIA official claims that the solution to the Iran issue. That's it, the solution is already there, but it won't necessarily happen, but there's a plausible solution out there. Let's get into the details. The solution would be between these two men we're seeing here. These two individuals, well, one is over 70 and the other is over 80. These former CIA officials claim that the handshake agreement that will happen in the coming days, in the next few weeks, will be key next May. Donald Trump and Xi Jinping, the president of China and the president of the United States, are going to meet face to face. They're going to greet each other in China. By the way, they would definitely have the answer. Today, Donald Trump said that China was grateful because the Strait of Hormuz had been opened, that Xi Jinping was happy because the Strait of Hormuz had been opened, that everything was going to be fine, that the Chinese president was happy. Hours later, the truth came out. No, the Strait of Hormuz was not open, it was closed, both by Iran and on the other side by the United States. The Strait of Hormuz is still closed. In light of this, we'll have to see the reactions. But John Kiakao, former CIA agent, former official, by the way, anti-terrorism expert at the CIA, he said that the handshake agreement between President Trump and Xi Jinping could disrupt Iran's military supply lines and help bring an end to the conflict. In other words, Iran would no longer have a way to supply itself with weapons, according to what he says. That intervention would be what makes the difference. If that's the truth, if they're going to meet face to face, it's most likely that the Iran conflict will come to an end. But if they don't meet face to face, if this event doesn't happen, the conflict will probably continue and weapons will keep coming from China and other countries. They don't arrive directly. They come through intermediaries that could be Russia or could be other countries. What John Kiakao, former CIA agent, says is not surprising, at least here on this channel, because we've already discussed something similar to this. After the announcement of the agreement with Xi Jinping, or Trump's message saying there was already a deal, well, at first it seemed like everything was going well, he says. Trump says China is very happy with their plans to permanently tear apart the tight handshake we're going to have over the Hormuz issue. Later, he gives me a hug, like it said in the report from his network, a big fat hawk or something like that, like a really big hug, something like that. He says, I'm still working on it, he says, for them, meaning that the issue of the Strait of Hormuz, they open it for China. And for Europe, it's not that it's a favor, that he's doing them a favor. That it wouldn't have been necessary if there had been war, right? So, well, it's not really a favor. That doesn't count as a favor. It's like if you create the problem and then give the solution and then say you're the hero. Many politicians act that way, we know that, but not usually so openly, right? At least they usually try to hide it, but this time they didn't even bother. Well, China, on the other hand, has criticized the lack of military communication from the United States, and let's just say they're not very confident either. They have agreed. He says they have agreed not to move weapons into Iran. President Xi will give me a big handshake. He says if when I get there in a few weeks we're working together intelligently and very, very well, says Trump on his social media. The president plans not only to meet next May for a handshake and a hug and to talk about this issue, but also to discuss other topics such as possibly artificial intelligence and China's technology issues. They might also possibly touch on the topic of Taiwan, a red line that the Chinese hardly want to cross, but it's possible it will be brought up. It's possible. I won't even say goodbye. Let's move to the next video. It's about to start, and we're about to go live with Astrid. So let's head over there and keep talking. See you later.